The Case of the Incumbent, Invalid. Claire, Griffin. Of all the adventures I shared with my friend Sherlock Holmes, I cannot recall one other in which he was quite so ambivalent about its outcome than the dreadful affair of the Abernettys, nor one which he felt so reluctant to pursue, yet was driven to its tragic and macabre denouement because of his peculiar sensitivity regarding the role he played therein. I have never chronicled the affair, but a chance remark recently while discussing with Inspector Lestrade the bizarre case of the 6 Napoleons, and the fact that the main participants have long since been freed to seek new lives in South Australia, encourage me to believe he will tolerate my jotting down a few remembrances of the case. The trivial remark of how far a sprig of parsley had sunk into melting butter on a hot day first seized his attention, but it was on a raw day in early January 1885 when we first became embroiled in the question of Lady Abernetty's possible murder. Fog had shrouded the city in the earlier hours of the day, and would probably return in the late afternoon. But at that hour a pale straggle of sunlight lit a street almost deserted, but for the occasional cab and passerby ulstered and muffled against the chill damp. Despite the warmth of the fire, I could not resist a shiver. "I'm sorry you feel you cannot afford to take the cure at Baden-Baden next spring," drawled my friend from his easy chair beside the hearth. I confess he gave me rather a start. I had said nothing about my somewhat wistful ambition to pamper my indifferent health at the famous resort in the Black Forest. Shortly before I met and took up residence with Holmes at Baker Street, I had returned from service in Afghanistan with the legacy of a Giselle bullet, and there were times, especially when I felt the London fog on my bones, that it throbbed. I could more easily or cheaply take the cure at Bath, but I had a fancy for Baden-Baden, not for its casino and racecourse, but to stroll along the banks of the Ouse, where Brahms composed his Lichtenthal Symphony and Dostoevsky strolled under the ancient trees. "My dear Watson," Holmes replied to my start of surprise, "you've been haunting travel agencies on your days off. Your desk is littered with brochures and timetables. I observed you studying the balance in your passbook with a morose expression, and you've been poor company ever since. I beg your pardon if I appear so. It's this dismal weather. Don't you find the fog depressing, Holmes? Not I." My companion's grey eyes sparkled. "I find it stimulating. I conjure up all manner of fiendish doings under its cover. By the way," he added casually, "you will let me know when the carriage pulls up at our front door. Are we expecting someone?" My spirits lifted. Since I had resided with Holmes, many interesting people had crossed the threshold of 221B Baker Street, some of whom had invited us into the most intriguing and dangerous adventures it had ever been my privilege to share and chronicle. "Prospective client." Holmes took a note from inside his pocket and spread it open on his knee. "The hour mentioned is 3. Ah, there strikes the clock. Anything of interest?" I inquired eagerly. "I fear not," sighed Holmes. "A domestic dispute, I fancy. Cases worthy of engaging my complete attention have been sparse in recent weeks." I echoed his sigh. I had learned to dread these periods of inactivity when my friend lapsed into boredom and melancholy. I had discovered only recently his injudicious use of cocaine in such lapses, a regrettable weakness from which I seemed powerless to dissuade him. "Carriage has just stopped at the curb." I observed a rather large lady in furs, and a rather small man in greatcoat and Homburger light. Could these be our visitors? Ah, since you speak in the plural, the lady must be accompanied. A Mrs. Mabel Bertram, Watson, a widow, she writes. So the gentleman is not her husband. He rose, gave his shoulders a twitch, and stood with his back to the fire. The knock on our door could almost be described as deferential. At my friend's nod, I admitted our visitors. Have I the honor to address Mr. Sherlock Holmes, the famous detective? Inquired the gentleman, in a pleasant yet suave manner. I am Dr. John Watson. This is Mr. Sherlock Holmes. Won't you come in? The woman who advanced into the room was indeed Juno-esque, stylishly dressed in a fur-trimmed coat of the color that was called cobalt blue, and a feathered hat perched somewhat coquettishly on Titian hair that owed more to the cosmetician than to nature. I perceived her to be a woman of 50, whose features bore the remnants of once proud beauty. Her companion was slim and dapper, with dark, lively eyes and a waxed moustache. He removed his Homburg to reveal a sleek, dark head. "Mr. Holmes, how kind of you to see me," greeted the lady warmly. "I am Mabel Bertram. May I present Mr. Ston Plush?" Bows were exchanged, and, standing well back, Holmes invited his visitors to take seats before the fire. Mr. Plush preferred to stand with his back to the window, so that he was almost in silhouette. "Draw your chair closer to the fire, Mrs. Bertram," coaxed my friend. "I observe you are shivering from the inclement weather." "It is not the chill that makes me shiver, but the anxiety caused by my dilemma." She fixed her gaze imploringly on his face. "You are my last hope, Mr. Holmes." "Dear me." After one swift scanning glance over her entire person, he leaned back in his armchair, steepling his fingers against the shabby velvet front of his smoking jacket and examining her face from eyes that were mere slits under his drowsy lids. "You mentioned in your note you were concerned about the welfare of a relative. Pray go on." "To be precise, my stepmother. I am the eldest daughter of Sir William Abernetty by his first marriage. Upon the death of my mother, he married Miss Alice Pemberton, a lady some 10 years older than myself. There was a daughter from this second marriage, Sabina, and a son born posthumously, Charles. You may be amazed at my concern for my stepmother when she has 2 children of her own, but being so close in age, we have always been on the best of terms. Until recently. And what has happened to cause this rift?" "Nothing," burst out the lady. Restraining herself quickly, she went on. "Nothing that I can account for. There's been no quarrel, no exchange of harsh words, yet Charles and Sabina have informed me in the plainest of terms that she refuses to see me. I should add here that Lady Abernetty is an invalid. Neither my half-brother nor sister are married, and both reside with their mother in Grosvenor Square." Holmes raised his eyebrows ever so slightly. He had begun to look rather bored, but at the mention of the elite address he perked up a little. Nevertheless, he murmured, "I fail to see what assistance I can be. As you say, you are not the lady's daughter and can lay no claim to her affections. She may see you or not as she pleases. Her children are no doubt following her instructions. Hear me out, I implore you." Mabel Bertram laid aside her muff and clasped agitated hands. "I am not alone in being excluded from her door. My stepmother has suffered from an affliction of the lungs for many years, and a doctor has been in constant attendance. Imagine my horror when I was informed by Dr. Royce Miles that he no longer calls upon Lady Abernetty. at the request of her son Charles, and this after a professional attendance of many years. Her lower lip trembled. Mr. Holmes, I fear for my stepmother's life. My friend frowned. Have you reason to believe your brother and sister have anything but the most loving regard for their mother? Mabel Bertram coughed discreetly behind a lace-trimmed handkerchief. My stepmother has many admirable qualities, Mr. Holmes, but I think it fair to say that with her children she was something of a Tartar. There was never any question of either Charles or Sabina marrying. Her formidable manner drove away any suitors or lady friends. Alice much preferred to have them at her own beck and call. Son and daughter have always been expected to stay close to home, and Alice has always kept a tight on the purse strings. Now I hear Sabina's been seen gadding about in new gowns, and Charles has joined the Footlights Amateur Dramatic Society. Dear me! Holmes smiled in amusement. Mr. Holmes, I fear my stepmother no longer has the power to influence her children. Would that be such a bad thing? Asked my friend quietly. Their indulgences seem innocent enough. He suddenly lifted a piercing gaze to her companion. In what capacity do you accompany Mrs. Bertram, Mr. Ston Plush? The gentleman hesitated. As Mrs. Bertram's legal adviser and friend. You are a solicitor, then? Mr. Plush handled my late husband's estate, and before that his business affairs, intervened Mrs. Bertram. He has been kind enough to act for me in this matter. I have written several letters expressing Mrs. Bertram's concern and requesting access to her stepmother. Beyond that my hands are tied. There is no legal way we can obtain admittance to the house on Grosvenor Square. Were we to force entry, the Abernettys would be quite within their rights to summon the police. I did enter the house through the servants' entrance on the first day I was refused admittance, confessed Mrs. Bertram, with a slight blush. You did not tell me this, began the lawyer in a vexed tone. My dear, it was a humiliating experience. I was actually ejected by the butler. Charles and Sabina reacted with quite uncharacteristic hostility. Perhaps because I had seen evidence of their neglect of their mother. Indeed, and what was that? Holmes glanced at her keenly. It was Lady Abernetty's custom to have a roll with parsley butter for her breakfast every morning. The cook had obviously prepared the tray, but there was the butter still standing on the table at noon, with the parsley quite sunk into the butter. Alice always demanded a well-run, fastidious kitchen. And when did this visit take place? Interrupted Holmes. On the 1st day of August. And you have not seen the... Sirs. He returns to your correspondence? 2 letters, one from each of the children and each couched in similar terms, reiterating that their mother wished no further communication with Mrs. Bertram. There was no cause for alarm concerning Lady Abernetty's health. Would Mrs. Bertram please leave the matter as it stands? My friend returned his gaze to Mabel Bertram's face. But you feel you cannot do so. The lady leaned forward. I see I must confide in you my darkest fears. You may think me a fanciful, even hysterical woman, but I fear my stepmother has met with foul play. Only tell me this isn't so, Mr. Holmes, and I will never intrude upon them again. Of course, there is also the matter of the power of attorney, interjected Plush, which has been given to the son. Presumably. My friend was silent for several minutes, his eyes closed, while the lady continued to gaze at him beseechingly. Behind Mrs. Bertram's chair, Mr. Aston Plush stirred uneasily. When Sherlock Holmes reached a decision about taking a case, he often moved quite abruptly. He did so now, springing briskly from his chair. "I will look into the matter for you." "Oh, Mr. Holmes, you will find me so grateful and generous." Mr. Plush had come forward to assist his client from her chair. She flashed him a glance before she lowered her veil. "Hopefully you will hear from me within the week." "Watson, the door." "How will you?" she inquired timidly. "My methods are my own." "Good day to you," he returned brusquely. I ushered out the pair and returned to find Holmes filling his pipe from a tobacco pouch he kept in an old Turkish slipper on the mantelpiece. "Well, what did you make of that, Watson?" he asked, smiling. "It seemed to me a tawdry affair. But, of course, the lady's anxiety was genuine." My friend laughed softly. "One of your most endearing qualities is your naivete about the good in people." I must confess to feeling slightly nettled by my friend's cynicism. "How did she strike you?" Here we have a rather theatrical, still handsome woman who knows her charms. "Did you notice which chair she took, with her back to the window, away from the daylight, and where the firelight would soften and enhance her looks? She may not have wished to sully her dress with the rather obvious pipe ash scattered on your chair," I retorted. "Well done," approved my friend. "And what did you make of the silent partner, Mr. Ashton Plush?" I was surprised a lawyer should take such an interest in a domestic squabble. "Indeed, I feel he has what is generally termed a vested interest." "Did you mark where he stood, Watson?" "Behind her chair, in a most protective manner." "No, where his own face was in shadow, and he could observe me observing her. He wanted to gauge my reaction to her story. There's more to this than meets the eye, Watson. A lady dressed in the height of fashion in the company of a man some 10 years younger than herself. She evinces little sympathy for the plight of her siblings, yet a great deal of concern for her stepmother. What is her real concern? We might look into the father's background. He took down a red-covered reference book from the mantelpiece. "Ah, yes, Abernetty, Sir William, knighted for services to the crown. A son of impoverished country gentry, made a fortune in the East by mysterious and possibly devious means. Returned to England 1830, whereupon he married Clarissa, daughter of Sir Arthur Humphrey, and entered politics. Money opens many doors, Watson, even one on Grosvenor Square. Wife died in 1848, one daughter Mabel. Married Miss Alice Fernburton 1850, died 1852. A Hudson made some bad investments in the East Indies, died with his fortune considerably reduced. What does that tell us, Holmes? I'm not sure, but it should tell us something. What did you think of the story of the part of the parsley sunk into the butter? Almost ludicrous." Holmes looked at me musingly. "Did you indeed? I hope to teach you the importance of trivialities. Do you have the time to join me on this adventure, Watson? If it is indeed to be an adventure, I doubt if I can promise you a baboon or a cheetah on this occasion." "My dear Holmes, if you think I could possibly be of use." I still felt a thrill of pride at having my assistance requested, as I had not yet shared as many exploits with my friend as I have to this date, and it was all quite new and uncharted to my prosaic way of life. Holmes smiled in one of his rare flashes of warmth. "Thank you. I shall as always value your company, and your medical expertise may be of value should we chance to meet the invalid. But at the moment I would greatly appreciate your going to your club. You may even choose to spend the night there to avoid the evening fog. I have to give this matter a great deal of thought, and I can't predict how many pipes will bring me to a solution. Being aware of his practice of using tobacco for a stimulus to his thought processes, until the room was filled with an acrid pall of smoke, I was happy to oblige. When I returned next day at noon, I was met by an astonishing sight. My friend stood in our little sitting room, transformed into a bohemian with flowing locks, a flourishing moustache, a hat with a curled brim, a dashing cape and yellow-spotted silk bandana knotted at his throat. "Come, Watson, we can't have you looking so dull. Break out your fancy duds." His eyes were dancing merrily in his long, lean face. Accustomed as I was becoming to my friend's disguises, I perceived some plan was afoot. "I have nothing half so showy, and shall be obliged to go as I am." "Where are we going, by the way?" "I've work for you, Watson, if you're willing to undertake it. You know I'm always happy to oblige." "Thank you. I want you to call upon your colleague, Dr. Royce Miles. I understand he has rooms in Knightsbridge. I want you to inquire in your professional capacity about the health of Lady Abernetty. Say you have had an enquiry about her and seek a word of discreet advice. Take careful note of the interview, how the good doctor looks, what he has to say, any minor detail. You know my methods. And you, Holmes? I'm off to join the Footlights Amateur Dramatic Society with the expectation of making the acquaintance of Charles Abernetty. You see before you Sebastian Food, aspiring actor. These ladies and gentlemen of leisure and thespian pursuits are meeting for rehearsal of their forthcoming production. We'll meet back here for supper and compare our findings. I had removed my damp outerwear and was sitting before the fire in my dressing gown, the times when Sherlock Holmes returned from his expedition. One glance at his face showed even under the disguise that he was in a brooding, taciturn mood. "Not now," he said, in answer to my unspoken question. "I need to rid myself of these trappings and get a hot meal inside me before I can discuss the day's events. Will you ring for Mrs. Hudson and advise her of our readiness for supper?" After Mrs. Hudson's excellent roast beef and Yorkshire pudding, he poured us both a whiskey and soda and lit a cigar. For half an hour perhaps he sat in the darkened room, gazing meditatively into the fire. I knew him too well to break into his reverie. The striking of the clock aroused him at last. "Let us have the lamp, Watson. I thought indulge in a game of whist before we go to bed." "You astound me, Holmes." "Do I? I won't when I inform you we've been invited for a hand tomorrow afternoon at Grosvenor Square. I need to freshen up my knowledge of the rules. I gather you've succeeded in making the acquaintance of Charles Abernetty." "Indeed I have. He's quite the shining light of the Footlights Amateur Dramatic Society. A dapper little man, Watson, but somewhat nondescript in feature and colour, which would, I think, give him the opportunity to play many roles. Quite theatrical in his approach to acting, but he has a few subtle nuances which are quite interesting. In personality or stage presentation." Holmes chuckled. "You always come straight to the point with these little pragmatisms of yours." "Yes, where does one leave off and the other begin?" After I had watched the rehearsal, I begged to be introduced to him by the president of the society, whose acquaintance I had previously made. I praised Mr. Abernetty's performance extravagantly, and he became quite enchanted with me, with what seemed mingled vanity and a need for self-reassurance. Such was the rapport we established. He invited me to accompany him to Drury Lane one evening where an artist he greatly admires is presently performing. The subject of whist somehow crept into the conversation. When I said I played, he immediately invited me for tomorrow afternoon. Did I have a friend? He asked. Indeed I did, said I. Then his sister Miss Sabina Abernetty would make a fourth. Well, you've got us over the doorstep. Well done, Holmes. My companion shrugged his narrow shoulders. I wonder if I have done well. He turned the conversation abruptly. How did you fare with Dr. Royce Miles? I had feared he might be rather reticent about a former patient, but he was quite loquacious on the subject of Lady Abernetty. Glad to have her off his hands, and wished me all the luck in the world. She is apparently one of those irascible patients all doctors dread to treat. And her ailment? Congestion of the lungs, which is placing quite a strain on the heart. Embarrassed left ventricle. Can't survive much longer, which will be a blessing for the children. She is, according to Miles, a cold woman who treats, and has always treated her son and daughter like servants rather than loved children. Miles was full of praise for the care and attention they lavish on her, when neglect might carry her off sooner. That's a harsh observation, Holmes. It's what Mrs. Bertram says she fears. Miles was surprised at her apparent concern. She has made only one query about her stepmother's health, which was when she discovered the doctor had been dismissed. In his many visits to Grosvenor Square, he never once saw her at the house. It's possible her visits didn't coincide with his. And what is the appearance of this Dr. Royce Miles? A bluff, somewhat florid man. Though I shouldn't venture such a remark about a fellow medico, I fancy he likes his port, which could be the reason for his dismissal. I'm sure he's competent enough. I hastened to the defense of my colleague. My friend's only reply, a grunt. I must confess I'm baffled, Holmes. His anxiety is genuine. I believe Lady Abernetty's health is a subject of immense concern to quite a few people. The question is why. You surely give no credence to Mrs. Bertram's suspicion that she's met with foul play. Having met Charles Abernetty, did I envisage him as capable of matricide, that vilest of crimes? Did Alice Abernetty, like Clytemnestra, dream she had given birth to a serpent who suckled blood from her breast? He threw away his mood with his cigar. Come, Watson, deal the cards. The house in Mayfair, that most discreetly elegant of London districts, was Georgian, with a protective railing of iron spikes, double doors with flanking Doric pillars, large bay windows, a set of steps on the left leading down to the servants', entrance and mews leading to stable and coach house. How much do you think this would fetch in realty? Murmured Sherlock Holmes. He had resumed his disguise of the previous day with luxuriant locks and moustache. Sebastian Flood and John Watson, he announced to the elderly butler who answered the door. I believe Miss Charles Abernetty is expecting us. The small salon to which we were conducted had the furnishings of an earlier era, with its marble Adam fireplace, its Chinese wallpaper and carpet, and Chippendale furniture. Charles Abernetty greeted us enthusiastically. His sister, dressed in a dark cashmere gown, rose from a wing chair and glided across the floor to meet us. Her manner was more restrained, but no less welcoming. They were a singularly colourless pair, when one recalled the vivacity of their half-sister, both slight of build, and with scarcely a year between them in age. They were so alike that the only differences between them were those determined by gender and a certain variance of personality. What soon became apparent was their deep affection for each other. You must forgive our old-fashioned introductions were exchanged. This was how the Runeley, when the house came into the family's possession, has always preferred it this way. Ah, you have a parent in residence, observed Holmes. Will we have the pleasure of meeting Mrs. Abernetty? Our mother is an invalid and does not receive visitors, interposed Sabina. The cold weather disagrees with her. Perhaps you would care to have my friend take a look at her. At their startled look, he hurried on. Watson here is a fully qualified medical practitioner. I'm sure that at any time he'd be happy to give you his professional opinion. As I murmured acquiescence, I saw Charles dart a look at his sister. She maintained an impeccable composure. Thank you, you're very kind, but we have our own family doctor who takes care of mother's needs. Perhaps you might know him, Watson. What is his name? Dr. Hallowell, she replied after a brief hesitation. She was beginning to look a trifle annoyed, as well she might, by Holmes's persistence. I'm sure he's a very good man, I said soothingly. And pray don't apologize for your furnishings. This is a charming room. You are most fortunate, added my friend, in the irrepressible role he had adopted, in owning this delightful residence in such an elite location. Its worth must be prodigious. Charles flushed up to the eyes. Mother would never consider selling up. It's quite impossible. I've offended you, said Holmes. My candor runs away with my discretion at times. I see the cards are on the table. I enjoy nothing so well as a good game of whist with friends. Shall we play? Said Charles, eagerly, drawing out a chair. As the game progressed companionably, I felt a sense of awe at the expertise in which Holmes sustained the bogus personality of Sebastian Flood. It was evident that Charles Abernetty admired him immensely and hung on his every word. It was equally apparent that Sabina Abernetty was reserving her judgment on their new acquaintance. She was pleasant, but decidedly cool. At 4 o'clock she rose from the table and pulled on a bell rope hanging beside the fireplace. "Are you calling for tea, Saby?" asked Charles. "That would be welcome." Miss Abernetty's change of position had allowed her to see the fire had fallen low. "We must ask Minter to throw on more coal," she remarked. "No need to bother Minter. He has enough work to do. I'll attend to the fire myself," responded her brother. Another bell rang somewhere in the house. A look of vexation crossed Charles Abernetty's face. "There's Mother," he said tersely. "I'll go," said his sister serenely. "It's time for her medicine, I suppose," remarked Holmes idly as he watched our host at his fireside task. "It requires quite a few servants to maintain a household of this magnitude." Charles did not appear to hear, but Holmes persisted. "It is admirable of Miss Abernetty to take the place of a nurse." "It's how she wishes it," replied Charles. "While my sister is away, gentlemen, I think we have time for a glass of this very excellent port." He crossed to a decanter on the sideboard. "Not an excellent port," observed Holmes as he sipped appreciatively, "but a superb one." Charles flushed with pleasure. "From my own cellar. I shall fetch you each a bottle." "Nonsense. I'll go at once." "For shame, to leave you alone," said Miss Abernetty a moment or two later. "Where is Charles?" "Minter's just about to bring in the tea. I believe your brother has gone down the cellar." A coal exploded from the fire onto the rug. Sabina started violently, seized the tongs and threw it back on the grate. She spent some little time examining the rug for signs of damage while my friend sat observing her. Charles returned presently with a bottle under each arm. His demeanor had markedly changed. His face had a pale, clammy look, and his hands shook as he placed the bottles on the table. "Why, Abernetty, you are ill!" exclaimed Holmes. "Charles, come and sit down." His sister led him to the wing chair, turning a grave face to us over her shoulder. "My brother suffers from a morbid of confined spaces. You should have sent Minter, Charles." "You're right, of course." Charles mopped his brow with his handkerchief. "But he does so hate to go there himself." "Stuffy places, cellars," agreed Holmes. "I'm distressed that your kindness has caused you such discomfort." "My dear fellow, think nothing of it. It's a foolish whimsy of mine and will soon pass." After tea, we took our departure with the promise to return the following Sunday afternoon for another hand. Once outside, the air of bonhomie Holmes had exhibited before the Abernettys fell away, and his mood became thoughtful. "Well, Holmes," said I, "we're no closer in the mystery, if there is one. It all seemed perfectly forward to me. Devoted children, really rather a sad pair. At least we know the mother exists." "How do we know that, Watson?" "Why, you heard it yourself. She rang for attention. A bell was rung from somewhere in the house." "But you are right, they are a sad pair. But there are undercurrents, Watson, that could be sinister. There were several incidents that pointed to which you completely overlooked. I wish you'd explain them to me. By this time next week, I will have uncovered their secret, and I think it will be more evil than you can comprehend." "If you say so. But I wish you weren't so jealous with your deductions. I feel that Holmes's overweening vanity caused him to be mysterious in case he was proven wrong, or in the instance of proving himself right, so that he could produce his solution with a flourish like a magician producing a rabbit out of a hat. There's far more to be unearthed before I can confide in you. But I do value your assistance." "I don't seem to have contributed much," I replied somewhat ruefully. "More than you know. Are you acquainted with Dr. Hallowell?" "No, but I can look him up in the medical register." "Good man. There's a cab. Hail it, Watson. An early night for us, I think. There's work to be done tomorrow." Holmes was up and about before I had stirred from my bed. When he returned at noon, he made an even more astonishing figure in the rough clothes and hobnail boots of the British workman. His hat was worn on the back of his head. He wore a rakish scarf and had not shaved that morning. "I've been out looking for work, Watson," he chuckled. "Were you successful?" "Not in Grosvenor Square." "You tried the Abernetty's address?" "I thought they might be in need of a coachman or groom. I went in through the mews. Quite deserted, Watson. No carriage, no horses, the coachman stood empty. Minter must have glimpsed me from the servants' quarters and came out. Sent me off with a flea in my ear. Curious, isn't it, that the only servant we've seen is the old butler? No maid, no footman, for all we know no boots. Mrs. Bertram did mention the servants had been dismissed. Yes, I find that useful information. It's simply the Abernettys could no longer afford to keep them." Holmes chuckled. "Great deeps your attention, Watson. One thing hasn't. I was standing at the window as I spoke. The urchin who stands across the street, watching our premises. He answers the description of the lad who came to our rooms earlier inquiring about me. He wasn't in need of my services, so Mrs. Hudson sent him off, but he's still hanging about. He must have seen you come in, Holmes." My friend came to stand beside me. The youth leaning against a lamp-post wore a greatcoat 2 sizes too large for him and a cloth cap pulled down over his ears. Between his muffler and his cap, nothing much could be seen of his face, but he occasionally darted glances up at our window. "Things are moving fast and we must move with them," murmured Holmes. "Did you check the register?" "I'll do straightway after lunch. I'm off to the Doctor's Commons, which will sacrifice on the sideboard for Mr. Charles Abernetty, for his kindness of yesterday." When next we met, Holmes's sallow cheeks bore the flush of a grim excitement. "Well, what did you learn about Dr. Halliwell? Are we able to contact him?" "Only if we hold a séance. Been dead a year." Holmes gave an odd little laugh. "I too have just spent an informative hour. Let me don my disguise, Watson, and we'll be away." Miss Sabina Abernetty was not at home at Grosvenor Square, but Mr. Charles Abernetty greeted us cordially, although with some surprise. "We were passing your door, and hoped you would not mind us calling in with this little token of gratitude for your hospitality." He produced the bottle with a flourish. Charles was suitably gratified, and bade us sit in the small salon while he rang for tea. "May we inquire about Mrs. Abernetty's health?" Holmes was all solicitude. Charles studied him in silence for several minutes before he spoke. "I do believe Mother would like you as much as we do. Would you like to meet her?" "Very much," declared Holmes. "I'll go and see that all is in readiness. She's very vain despite her advancing years." He left the room, shutting the door firmly behind him. I glanced quizzically at my friend, but he was frowning into the fire. "Let's just give Mother half an hour, shall we?" Charles said on his return. "I warn you, you'll find her in a darkened room. She dislikes the light, even on a wintry day such as this. Invalids do have their little fancies, as the good doctor here will know." Charles Abernetty's manner seemed both excited and nervous. He kept rubbing his hands together and smiling, not at his new acquaintances, but inwardly as if silently congratulating himself. "I can't think what's keeping Minter with the tea," he complained. "Shall we have cognac instead?" "Please don't trouble yourself," said Holmes hastily. "Tell me, have you quite recovered from your indisposition of yesterday?" Abernetty's smile faded. In fact, he looked annoyed at the reminder. Quite a trifling matter. Shall we go up to Mother?" "I'll just ring the bell to let her know we are coming." He led the way up a balustraded staircase to the next floor, and along an unlit carpeted passage. Away from the snug salon the air was chill, the passage gloomy and the carpet thin and worn under our feet. "This is Mother's room," he said with his hand on the knob. "Do speak softly. She dislikes loud noises." He flung open the door. "Mother, I've brought 2 gentlemen to see you." The room was indeed dark, unlit by fire or lamp, and with the curtains drawn. In a large old-fashioned 4-poster bed lay the shadowy form of an elderly woman whose features could just be made out within the frill of a large nightcap. Her eyes were closed, and we could hear her stertorous breathing. "Oh, bother," said Charles in vexation. "She's dropped off." "Charles, what are you doing?" There was a piercing whisper from the passage behind us. Sabina Abernetty had arrived home. The violence of the weather was evident in her pink cheeks and disordered hair. She had apparently just come in and discarded her coat and hat downstairs. "Ah, Miss Abernetty, again a pleasure," drawled Holmes. She ignored him and continued to address her brother indignantly. "You know how perverse Mother can be. She might have had one of her tirades." "As it turns out, she's asleep," said Charles sulkily, "which is as well. Do forgive my brother. She turned to us, summoning a smile. He means well. No harm done. I'm sorry we missed the pleasure of meeting your mother, replied Holmes cheerfully. We must take our leave, but look forward to our game on Sunday afternoon. Come, Watson. Outside in the square we had to hold our hats against the blustering wind. We trudged in silence for several minutes. What did you make of that melodrama? Inquired Holmes presently. Decidedly odd. But at least we know Lady Abernetty is alive and can set Mrs. Bertram's fears at rest. My companion snorted. Did anything strike you about the sick room? I thought commonly cold. It was as chill as a morgue. No fire, no steam kettle, both of which I'm sure would be recommended for a patient suffering from congestion of the lungs. Indeed, are you suggesting neglect? What else struck you? Come, man, you must have been in dozens of sick rooms. That slight odor common to all. Who was missing? You're right, Holmes. Not even a whiff of carbolic. What does that imply? I think we may receive a note from the Abernettys offering apologies for Sunday afternoon, was his only reply. Holmes was not often confounded, but the next event produced that effect. We were sitting beside the fire after supper that evening when we heard a light, quick step on the stairs, followed by a sharp rap on the outer door. Who could that be? I asked, surprised. I suggest you open the door, Watson, replied Holmes in that slightly caustic tone he could adopt at times. A woman stood in the doorway, shrouded in a long woolen cloak with a hood. Pushing past me, she advanced into the room, throwing back her hood to reveal the face of Sabina Abernetty. Holmes rose from his chair and faced her. For the space of a minute, they examined each other. So I've tracked you down, Mr. Sherlock Holmes, the famous detective, she said bitterly. I congratulate you. Holmes's voice was slightly uneven. Why have you donned disguise to make my brother's acquaintance? Why have you flattered and deceived him and come to our home? I know the answer. You have been employed by that hateful woman, Mabel Bertram, to pry into our affairs. What has she been telling you? She's concerned for your mother's health, nothing more. Oh, there is a great deal more, Mr. Holmes. She checked her passionate outburst and fell silent. I took the opportunity to express a concern of my own. I trust you did not come alow the night, Miss Abernetty. Mentor is waiting in a hansom downstairs, she replied curtly. Where is your brother? At a meeting of his dramatic society, she turned fiercely on Holmes. What will satisfy you? What will end this persecution? I was shocked at the violence of her words, but Holmes answered her promptly. Seeing Lady Abernetty is alive, in reasonable health. Very well. You shall meet her on Sunday afternoon. She crossed to the door but turned on the threshold, her lip curling. I despise you. She drew up her hood and hurried down the stairs. There is a lady who does not bestow her contempt lightly. Holmes tried to laugh, but the tremor was still in his voice. A remarkable adversary, I observed. She is not my adversary, said Holmes softly. She is my enemy, or rather I am hers. He crossed to the window. Ah, there they go. Be a good fellow, Watson, and whistle me up a cab while I throw on my cap and ulster. I have to go out for a short time. Would you like me to accompany you? No, it's better that I go alone. Holmes looked shaken by the incident, but at the same time some grim determination had seized him, and I knew better than to persist. The following day he was restless and moody, and spent hours scraping on his old violin, until I felt compelled to protest. How does an evening at the theatre appeal to you? Holmes became suddenly brisk. Dan Leno's playing at Drury Lane. We'll dine out first. I was surprised at his choice of entertainment, since he usually preferred a violin recital at the Albert Hall. As usual, he read my thoughts. Come Watson, the most celebrated clog dancer and dame of our time. The man's an artist, probably in his own field a genius. Dan Leno was certainly in fine form that evening, performing acts of incredible physical ingenuity and changing from persona to persona with an inimitable blend of Cockney humour and sentiment and a variety of wigs and gowns. While the patrons about us rocked in their seats with laughter, Holmes sat silent, his fingers steepled across the front of his evening clothes, watching the performance under slumbrous lids. I had the impression, however, he was watching the little man's antics intently. The following day, to my surprise, he dressed for his appointment with the Abernettys without his usual disguise. "The game's up, Watson," he answered my look. "I think both parties are now aware of my identity and interest. Do you think we'll be introduced to the mother?" I have doubt of it. A pall of fog lay over London. The church bells sounded muffled and melancholy. It showed no signs of dissipating by early afternoon, and I was amazed when Holmes suggested we stroll to Grosvenor Square. "In this pea souper? You must be mad, Holmes. Why on earth? If you don't wish to accompany me, by all means stay by your cozy fireside. But if you want to experience one of the strangest adventures you've ever put to paper, and I know how you like to jot down these little cases of ours, then put on your hat and greatcoat, your warmest muffler, take your stoutest stick, and oh, yes, your service pistol." "My pistol, Holmes? Surely you don't expect to encounter any danger from that pair? It would be wise to prepare any eventuality." I found the next half hour or so distinctly unpleasant. I flatter myself that I am not a nervous man or highly imaginative, but I seem to feel the fog crawling on me like ghostly fingers. Lamp posts stood out like beacons, eagerly attained and reluctantly abandoned. The snickerings of leaves along the pavements seemed like the pattering of feet running up behind us. I was obliged to restrain myself from constantly glancing over my shoulder. A hansom looming at us, suddenly like a phantom coach as we crossed Oxford Street, gave me quite a start. "Nearly there, Watson," chuckled Holmes. "Mayfair seems almost deserted. Every sensible person indoors." Charles Abernetty evinced not the slightest surprise or curiosity at his new acquaintance's shorn hair and moustache. He greeted us with the same cordiality and drew us to the fire in the small salon. "How damp your clothes are!" he exclaimed. We walked. Charles blinked rapidly several times. "Through the fog? How extraordinary! May we please see Lady Abernetty?" requested Holmes rather tersely. "Ah, here's Sabina. Saby, the gentleman would like to see mother now. I'm afraid she's taking up, gentlemen. But rest assured, Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, you will meet her this afternoon." Miss Abernetty's face was pale above a gown of maroon merino trimmed with velvet and lace, elegantly draped to a slight bustle. Her manner towards my friend, although distant, was not overtly hostile. "Shall we play a hand or two while we're waiting?" suggested Charles. An expression of annoyance flitted over the detective's face, but he shrugged and sat down at the table. It was an uncomfortable game in a charged atmosphere. Only Charles seemed determined to make it companionable. I noticed that my friend observed Charles closely. Under the prevailing circumstances, The fellow seemed in unnaturally high spirits. A knock at the door was followed by the appearance of the tall, gaunt butler. "What is it, Minter?" asked Charles peevishly. "I didn't ring for you. This just came for you by messenger, sir." The butler presented a letter on a silver salver. Charles excused himself and slit open the envelope. "It's from Randell Burke, one of my brother's thespian friends," explained Sabina. "He's mislaid his script and wishes to borrow mine. Gentlemen, I'm afraid I shall have to step out for a minute." "Oh, Charles, in this weather?" demurred his sister. "It's only in Brook Street. A brisk walk will do me good. If our friends can walk from Baker Street, I can manage a swift jaunt around the corner. It's a pity to spoil our game, but there is. Holmes crossed to the bay window and held aside the curtain. Presently we saw Abernetty hurrying past the spiked fence in greatcoat and muffler. "May we see your mother now?" He turned to Miss Abernetty. "I'll see if she's awake." She pulled the bell rope. "Meanwhile, will you take tea? Miss Abernetty, we both know this is not a social occasion, but strictly a business matter. Please allow me to see your mother at once. Mr. Holmes," she came close to him and looked earnestly into his face, "please allow me to apologize for my words of Friday evening. My sister and I have not been on good terms for many years, but it still shocks me that she would hire a detective to spy on us. Are you aware of her motives?" "I am not at liberty to discuss Mrs. Bertram's motives," Holmes replied coldly. Minter reappeared, pushing a tea trolley. Holmes refused to partake and returned to the window, feeling rather embarrassed. I joined Miss Abernetty in a cup of tea, but refused the seed cake. "Are you watching for Charles?" inquired Sabina, almost tranquilly. "He shouldn't be long." She lingered over her tea, making desultory small talk with me. Instead of becoming impatient, Holmes in his expression grew grimmer. When at last a bell sounded somewhere in the house, there was a gleam of irony in his eyes. "I think your mother is ready to receive us. Shall we go up?" With the strain on my nerves, occasioned by our eerie walk through the fog, I fancied the dim passage had a clammy feel, as if the fog had seeped into the walls. Sabina moved softly, almost stealthily before us, until she came to the door of the sick room. "Mother, I've brought some gentlemen to see you." She pushed open the door. The shadowy figure in the four-poster bed hunched itself up on the pillows. Wisps of grey hair from under the frilled nightcap straggled over the forehead. Eyes glared peevishly from a face grey with age and ill health. Her hand came up from beside the bed, holding a walking stick. "What's this? You know my orders." "I won't see anyone," she shrilled at us querulously. "Go away, all of you. Get out of my sight." "Mother, don't upset yourself." The daughter glided towards her, but was driven back by the flailing stick. I will never forget the scene that followed. Though I do not remember the words, the tone of the dreadful imprecations, the humiliating insults and cruelties that stripped the soul of our companion bear have never left me. I felt a deep shame at being, however obliquely, the cause of Miss Abernetty's discomfiture. Throughout she was calm, but at last she turned to us and said in a low, tremulous voice, "Will that be all? Are you satisfied?" Holmes turned abruptly and walked out of the room, and I was fast on his heels. The strident voice followed us down the stairs. In the hall, Miss Abernetty faced us gravely. Her eyes looked large and dark in a face that had been drained of all its color. "Miss Abernetty, I owe you the profoundest of apologies," and bid you good afternoon, said Holmes. Minter, my ulster. The elderly butler was hovering by the front door. You are leaving, she said quickly. Won't you wait until my brother returns? Don't you also owe him an apology? Pray convey to him my regrets. Come, Watson, we must go. At least allow me to send down to the corner for a cab. Thank you, no, we will return as we came, on foot. I smothered a groan as I struggled into my damp greatcoat and picked up my stick. That was an embarrassing exposure for Miss Abernetty, I observed, when we had regained the square. I hope you're satisfied. I could not suppress the note of censure that crept into my tone. Holmes gripped my arm. Not another word. We had reached the corner when he suddenly swung back. Come, I want a word with Lady Abernetty. What? Have you gone mad, Holmes? Not I. Not as mad as that poor raving invalid we've just left. Come on, Watson, the chase is on, this way through the mews and around to the coach house. Ah, just as I thought. A candle was burning within, visible through a dingy window. My companion flung open the door. A figure in nightdress and frilled cap gave a startled cry. The game's up, Holmes said. Mr. Charles Abernetty. Abernetty shrank back against the wall, his features contorted with fury under the grotesque makeup. Damn you! I was brilliant. How could you possibly have found me out? Indeed, you were comparable with the great Dan Leno. Let's say there were other factors that led to your unmasking. Abernetty's eyes skimmed past Holmes to the doorway. No, Saby, don't. Sabina, equally as grim as Holmes, had materialized through the fog. She aimed a pistol at the detective's head. Do you feel quite so clever now, Mr. Sherlock Holmes? Don't move, Dr. Watson. Put your hand near your pocket, and I'll put a bullet through your friend's head. Don't be foolish, Miss Abernetty, said Holmes quietly. You haven't yet committed murder. Her face was a mask of cold, calculating fury. There's no proof that you've been at Grosvenor Square. You didn't even hire a cab. Holmes's hand moved swiftly to his lips. He blew 3 sharp blasts on his police whistle. Inspector Lanner and his men will be here soon. Put away the pistol, Miss Abernetty. You'll only make things worse for yourself. In her rage, she fired at him. The expression on her face changed quickly to one of chagrin as the pistol misfired. I quickly brought up my stick, taking advantage of her confusion, and knocked the weapon from her grasp. Holmes kicked it out of sight as Inspector Lanner and 2 constables burst into the room. Good afternoon, Mr. Holmes. The inspector nodded cheerfully at my friend. How may I assist you? I think if your men up the flagstone floor and dig a little, you'll discover, as I suggested in our earlier conversation, the body of Alice Abernetty. Murdered? No. I'm sure Lady Abernetty died of natural causes. Concealment of death and wrongful disposal of a body is the only crime here. I fear I shall not be the hero of this chronicle, should you set it down on paper. Holmes stretched his slippers towards the fire and leaned his cheek pensively on his hand. I have disinherited brother and sister for the sake of a greedy, already wealthy woman who seeks to impress and snare a younger man with a fashionable address. The terms of Sir William Abernetty's will, now a matter of public record, gave me the answer. The house in Grosvenor Square only belonged to Lady Abernetty during her lifetime. On her death it passed to his eldest child Mabel from the first marriage. Charles and Sabina Abernetty were to be dispossessed. There was very little real money. They were, shall we say, in an unenviable position. There were many times, Watson, when I nearly abandoned the case, but I was drawn on to its fascinating and macabre conclusion. The law must be upheld, Holmes. Oh yes, the law, he retorted bitterly. There are other laws, natural laws, that have been broken here. Since our return he had fallen into a mood of black depression, and I was worried that he might disappear into his room and seek solace in his unfortunate addiction to cocaine. I therefore attempted to distract him by laying before him the points of the case I did not yet fully understand. Who was the woman we saw in the sick bed on our second visit? That I suspect was Mrs. Minter, the cook. However unwilling they may have been, the Minters were accomplices to all that occurred. They probably agreed to the conspiracy, knowing they could find no other place at their time of life. Charles thought he was very clever with that little ruse, but it only served to convince me further that Lady Abernetty was... Of course, he wasn't aware of my identity then, but Miss Abernetty had already confirmed her suspicion of me. She was the youth watching our premises, Watson. When she burst into the sick room later that day, she was wearing a dress I had seen hanging up in the coach-house on my earlier visit as the groom in search of work. In their loveless, friendless childhood and youth, they turned to a world of acting and make-believe. I'm quite sure Charles had his mother's character down accurately in that little display today. Can you imagine, Watson, their bleak, deprived existence, reviled by the one person who might be expected to give them affection? It makes my blood run cold to think of it. He leaned forward, his elbows hunched on his knees. What will become of them? I can only hope the law will be kinder to them than I have been. Come, Holmes, you deal with yourself too harshly. Things would have gone much harder for Miss Abernetty if you had told the inspector she attempted your life. It was only pure luck that the pistol misfired. It was probably an old weapon that had belonged to her father and had been lying about in a drawer for years. She had every reason to hate me. By my interference, I had brought their brief and pathetic idyll to an end, but they could not have carried on their deception indefinitely, not with that woman of remarkable perspicacity, Mabel Bertram, waiting in the wings. What was the significance of the parsley in the butter? Ah, yes. Did you not hear Mrs. Bertram remark that her stepmother invariably had a roll with parsley butter for her breakfast? I believe that the cook had been preparing her tray, and the butter had been taken from the ice box. Meanwhile, Miss Abernetty had gone to the sick room to tend her mother's needs and discovered she had died during the night. She acted quickly, Watson, and with great presence of mind. The servants were summarily dismissed, and the plan put into action of burying the body under the flagstones in the cellar. In such a household, Watson, where the discipline is so rigid, so unyielding, and the presence of the mistress, even one confined to a sick room, so omnipotent, the butter in the natural course of events would have been returned to the ice box. The fact that the parsley had sunk so deep into the butter meant it had been left out for hours, and other events, unnatural events, were taking place. He reached inside his pocket and drew out a slip of paper. This is the fee I require from Mrs. Bertram. Holmes. As she herself observed, she intended to be grateful, and Mr. Plush added the rider of generous. I have acquired for her a fashionable address, and possibly a new husband. You shall have your little jaunt to Baden-Baden, Watson. That's exceedingly generous of you, Holmes, I stammered. A smile warmed his austere features. You deserve it, my dear fellow, after all I've put you through today. Even a solitary misanthropic chap like myself knows the value of true friendship.